myself Vipin Kumar, and with me is Vipul Kumar. So we are V Square today, and we are commutatively talking about secure practices with .NET services. So we are going to talk about the potential threats, some how we can manage to remove them, to how we can programmatically improve these things, and how we can uh, make code right in any aspect of the threads, Spotify, Sonar scans, and all. But before moving ahead, can you move this slide? Yeah. So let's talk about the North etiquettes first. So punctuality is one of them, that we should join the session 5 minutes prior to the session start time. Feedback is one of the most important part for everybody, like for us as well, so that we can deliver better next time. Silent mode. So it is requested you to be on the silent mode, and at the end of the this conversation, we will have a Q&A session where you can ask the question, but make your devices on silent mode so that uh, it will be easier to deliver the same, and avoid disturbance for unwanted chit chat, etc., so that anybody will be peacefully able to listen everything. Can you move the slide? Good. So let me talk about the agenda as well. As I already told you that we are talking about the importance of security in .NET. Types of threats. So we list down many types of threats like injection attack, cross-site scripting attack, cross-site request forgery, and authentication and authorization, MITM, like man in the middle attacks, insecure API, insecure direct object references, security misconfiguration, sensitive data exposure, insufficient logging and monitoring, denial of service attack, and some common practices are also there. So for all these, I think people can step up and start, delivering these things to you. Over to you, people. We can start.
Yeah, thank you for the intro, Vipin. So let's start with the importance of security in .NET. So this can be said about any other framework also. First of all, we should have we should protect the sensitive data. Now, this sensitive data can be anything like user credential, it can be their personal information, it can be their financial data like their credit card information. So we should have a secure method to store it and to access it. Next is we should prevent the unauthorized access. So only the user that have been authenticated and they have been authorized like they should be only allowed to access any resources, and we should implement safeguard according to this only. Next is if we have a secure service, we can mitigate security threats like SQL injection, cross-site scripting, and cross-site request forgery. Like our service would be more secure to these attacks. Next is we would maintain a we would maintain several compliances. So we have several industry standards such as GDPR, HIPAA, and PCI DSS, which avoids our legal penalties and which enhance the trust between our user and our application. Next is enhancing application trust. So it builds a user confidence by ensuring that our application are secure. So they would be more likely to use our application. They would not worry about losing the data or like the information leaking. Next is securing communication. So uh, when our user communicate to our service, the the communication between the service and the user should be secure. So no one can uh, like capture data in between. So we should uh, prevent that intercepting and tampering. Next is, and the last is like code quality and stability. So if we implement the best practices in coding and application design, we would reduce the vulnerabilities and improve our overall code and quality. Next are types of security threats. So first one is the injection attack. Now we have two types of injection attack. One can be SQL injection and the other one can be command injection. So let's look at the SQL injection first. In this kind of attack, the the attacker, they would inject some kind of SQL query into our data, into our system, and they can fetch any details like our username, the password. So we should like attacker, they can extract sensitive data from the database, including username and password. So, and they can also manipulate the data, like they can modify, delete, or insert data in the database, which can potentially corrupt our data integrity and causing like operational disruption. So what we can do to prevent this? First thing we can do is like we can use parameterized queries, which ensure that SQL queries that we are executing in our application are parameterized. So if a user inject a SQL, like instead of data, they inject a query, it would be treated as a data instead of a query if we use parameterized query. Next, we should have a lots of validation and sanitization. So whenever a user insert a data, we should validate it and sanitize it to ensure that only expected data type and format are accepted. And so it would reject any potentially harmful input itself. Now, next is command injection. So this here we are talking about the shell command, or like the commands that we are usually use in our CMD. So attackers can gain higher level privilege on the system, which allow them to perform administrative action, and like they can access some restricted areas in our application. They can also compromise the system by executing arbitrary commands that can lead to the full compromise of the host system, enabling attackers to install malware and create backdoors and disrupt services. So what we can do for that, we can use secure APIs. So we should utilize secure APIs or libraries that do not allow direct command execution so on user input. So if a user inputs a command like a shell command, so we should not execute that in our application. Next, again, we should validate and escape all user input to ensure that they are treated as data rather than the executable code. So we can avoid passing user input directly to shell commands. So this is one of the code example for how we can prevent the SQL injection. So in this example, we are using an embedded SQL query. So we are writing the query in the application in the API itself, and we are passing a username parameter from the API, which user will input. So instead of directly uh, directly adding the username into my SQL query string, I am using a SQL parameter class, which will make sure that the username would be treated as a data, as a string. It would not be treated as a SQL query. Now we have cross-site scripting. So it involves client-side code injection. So cross-site scripting involves the injection of malicious script into trusted website, which are then executed in the user's browser. This can lead to unauthorized access on some resources which are not which should not be accessible to our users. It can also cause data theft and manipulation. So through this, attackers can steal sensitive information such as cookies, session tokens, and other personal data like their username, their credential, their financial information, and or they can manipulate the website content to deceive the user. So what we can do to prevent it, we can validate the input and we can encode it. So validate and encode user input to ensure they are treated as a data rather than executable code. And we should implement output encoding to neutralize the malicious script before they are entered in the browser. So the data that we are outputting, we should also encode that. So if they like bypass our communication, they capture the data, they would not be able to decode it. We should also implement content security policy. We should deploy as security policies to restrict the source from which script can be executed. So significantly reducing the risk of cross-site scripting by preventing the browser from loading unauthorized script. So we should not load the unauthorized script that the user would input into our application. Now, next is cross-site request forgery. So again, this cause unauthorized action, like it exploits the trust a web application has in a user's browser by tricking the user into making unwanted action on a different site where they are unauthorized. So this can again result in unauthorized state change, such as modifying user settings or making transaction on their behalf. They can also exploit the session token. So each user, when they log in, they get a session token, which identify them from other user. So it is automatically included in the request by the browser. An attacker can perform action on behalf of the user without their knowledge. So if say I have someone's session token, I can log in on their behalf, even though I don't know their username or password. And by that, I can modify their account if they are using some if they have like their credit card information on the account, so I can use their information to make transaction and all. For prevention, we should implement CSRF tokens. So implementing anti-CSRF tokens, which are unique and unpredictable values that are included in the form and verified on the server side. So this ensures that the request is coming from an authorized source. Next is like we can add a same site cookie attribute to restrict from being sent along the cross-site request. So this helps prevent the CSRF by ensuring that cookies are only sent with same site request. So if we are receiving a token from a different site, like from a different front-end application, we should not accept that in a backend. This is one way we can prevent CSRF threat on .NET application. So we can add the add anti-forgery method in our program.cs file using builder service keyword, and we can mention the header name as CSRF token. So, and then we would have to add the decorator validate anti-forgery token on our controller level, like on the action method that we are using. We should mention that attribute, which will ensure that the token is present and valid in form submission. So whenever users submit the form, there would be a token in the request payload, and our action method would validate it and make sure that it's a correct one. Next is authentication authorization flaws. So every application that provides user to make they provide the functionality that they can make their account and they log in should implement authentication authorization, because there can be some resource which only an logged in user should access, and some resource can be that a user with a particular role should access. Like there can be an endpoint that only an admin should access, not a normal user or a customer user. So authentication weakness, these flaws occurs when the mechanism used to verify the identity of user are insufficient, so which allows the attacker to gain unauthorized access. This can happen due to weak password policy. So if the password criteria that we are telling our user, it's not sufficient, it might be smaller than 8 characters, it might not include special characters or number or uppercase or lowercase character, that can be one of the issue. Also, lack of multi-factor authentication can be an issue. So if someone lose their password and they don't have multi-factor authentication, so anyone can access their account then. Also, flawed session management. So if we are not managing our session correctly, anyone can access the session tokens and from our session, and again causing the issue. Authorization issue. So authorization flaws arises when a system fails to enforce proper permission, which allows user to perform action or access resource they shouldn't. Again, some resources should only be accessible by certain type of user. This can lead to privilege escalation, where a user gains higher level access than intended. Prevention is like strong authentication mechanism. So we should enforce strong password policies, use multi-factor authentication, and ensure secure session management practice to prevent unauthorized access through compromised credential. Now, then we have role-based access control. So we should implement the role-based access control to ensure that users can only access the resource and perform the action that are appropriate for their role. So admin should only be allowed to access the admin resources, and our customer should only be allowed to access the customer resources. And we should also regularly review and update the permission. So if let's say one of our admin users they left, they are not using their account anymore, so we should discard that account. We should not keep that account activated. So if someone uh, is able to get access of that account, they would be able to use the admin resource. So this one way we can implement authentication and authorization. So we are using the cookie authentication in this way. Like in the program.cs, we are adding the add authentication method with cookie authentication. And we are also adding the authorization with the policy that about for admin. So we are adding an admin role. And in controller, we can specify using the authorize decorator, and we can specify the role, that which role user with which role can access this action method. So here it's admin, so only admin can access this role, this action method. Next is the man in the middle tag. So this usually occur when there is an interception of communication. So when our user is communicating with our backend service, if we are not using HTTPS protocol, the data that we would be sending from our application to the user, or the data that user would be sending from client side to our server side, would not be encoded. It would be as it is. So if the password is, if they are sending a password, it would be as it is in the string form. So this causes an issue if someone is able to uh, capture the data from between. They would have the decoded data, and they can easily use it to do malicious activity. So uh, we should always implement the end-to-end encryption for all communication to ensure that the data transmitted between parties is secure and cannot be easily intercepted. So for that, we should always implement the HTTPS protocol in our application. We should also have strong authentication and certification. So utilizing strong authentication mechanism ensure the use of verified digital certificate to prevent attackers from successfully impersonating legitimate entities. This include regularly updating and managing certificates to avoid vulnerabilities. So when we implement the HTTPS protocol, we should have some certificates so we can verify that the end-to-end communication is happening. This is how we can implement end-to-end encryption. Like we can implement the HTTPS protocol in our .NET application. So in program.cs file, where we specify the middlewares, we can add these two middleware for that. Next is insecure API. So again, unauthorized access and data exposure. So when our API lacks proper authentication and authorization, unauthorized user can access sensitive data and functionality, which leads to data breach and unauthorized action. One more thing is improper rate limiting and throttling. So if we are not implementing adequate rate limiting or throttling controls, that makes our application vulnerable to DOS attacks. So and service disruption due to overwhelming request and volume. So someone can do a DOS attack on our application, like they can overwhelm our application with a large volume of requests, and that we won't be able to handle, and this would cause a disruption of our service. So for this also, we should implement strong authentication authorization, and we should enforce rate limiting and throttling. So implementing rate limiting and throttling can control request volumes, preventing abuse, and ensure stable performance. We should use techniques like token bucket algorithms and real-time monitoring to manage and mitigate potential abuse. So here we are using the authorized decorator to authorize attribute to make sure that our endpoint requires an authentication, like only authenticated user can access the endpoint update data in our application. So next we have insecure data object reference. So direct object reference exposed. So due to some design issues or some design, like the way we have implemented our application, we can expose some internal objects such as files, database keys, or URL without proper authorization checks. So which this would allow the attackers to manipulate references and access unauthorized resource, leading to data breach and unauthorized action. Lack of access control and validation. So this vulnerability stems from lack of access control validation, where the application fails to verify whether a user has proper permission to access a particular object or not. So attacker can exploit this weakness by bypassing the security measure and gain unauthorized access to sensitive information or functionalities. Prevention would be, we should implement indirect object reference. So using indirect references such as unique identifiers or tokens instead of exposing direct objects reference in URL or parameters, we can prevent the attacker from manipulating the references to access unauthorized resource directly. We should also implement the role-based access control, so only the authorized user can access a particular endpoint. Which would enforce a granular permission based on user role, ensuring that only authorized user can access a specific object. So this code retrieves user details based on authenticated user ID. So again, we are making sure that only a authorized user can access this endpoint. So the internal user details would not be exposed to an unauthorized user. Next, we have sensitive data exposure. So sensitive data can be anything like their credit card information, passwords, their username, their addresses, their full name. This count as a sensitive data. So exposing confidential information like this uh, is a risk to like theft or unauthorized access. We can so weak encryption or storage. So this occurs when our encryption or the data that we are storing is not encrypted. It could be we could be storing the password in string format instead of a hash format, which on a data breach, the attacker would have the password, not the encoded form, so they can easily use it. So for that, we should implement strong encryption. So we should encrypt the data both in transit, like when the data is being transit from server to client or client to server, and we should also encrypt it at rest. So like when we are storing it in a database, we can do that using robust cryptographic algorithm and regular update on encryption keys for enhanced security. We should also implement data masking and tokenization. So we should conceal the sensitive information using techniques like data masking and tokenization, preventing unauthorized access while maintaining functionality. So these are some examples for uh, an encryption standard. So we have advanced encryption standard, which utilizes a key of 256-bit for higher security. So it's widely recognized and adopted for its strength and its efficiency. Then we also have the RSA encryption, which has a key size of at least 2048 bits. It has higher security, but it would be more slower. We also have elliptic curve cryptography. It uses it's secure and widely recognized curves such as curve 25519 and SECP 256R1. We also have transport layer security. So we have TLS 1.2 and TLS 1.3 for secure communication, and we should avoid protocols like SSL and earlier version of TLS. And we should also implement hash functions. So for storing sensitive information like password, we should store them in the hash format rather than in the string format. So if there's a data breach, the attacker would not have the exact password. They would have hash, and they cannot they cannot decode the hash without the hash key. Then we have insufficient logging and monitoring. So if we are not doing a sufficient logging on our application, like we are not logging every issue or every operation that every sensitive operation that is occurring on our application, if in case some attack happens, we won't have any data or any logs to go from. Like we cannot know what went wrong, where the attack happened, where the where was the vulnerability, which part of our application the attacker targeted. So we should always have sufficient logging and monitoring. So it refers to insufficient logging and monitoring refers to lack of comprehensive logging and monitoring mechanism within an application. This efficiency makes it difficult to detect and respond to security incident promptly and increase the risk of undetected attacks and data breaches. We should have inadequate visibility into system activities. So without sufficient logging and monitoring, organization lack visibility into system activities. So we won't have a track record like which operation happened first and what went wrong, what part of our application did the attacker targeted, and like what was the vulnerability. So it makes it challenging to identify security threats and track user action or investigate suspicious behavior effectively. If we won't have anything to look for, we won't be able to tell what went wrong. So prevention would be we should implement robust logging mechanism. We should ensure that the application logs are comprehensive and there should be comprehensive information about the user activities, system events, and security related incident. So we should log data with including the timestamp, user identifier, and relevant contextual information. So each log should have a timestamp, like when it happened, a user identifier, which user did it, and relevant contextual information, that like what was the operation, where it happened, which part of our application it happened, like on data level or on presentation level, stuff like that. Then we have a real-time monitoring system. So we should also implement real-time monitoring system that continuously analyze log data for a sign of unauthorized access. So instead of waiting for something, like instead of going through existing logs, we can have systems which we can monitor in real time. We can see the abnormal behavior, we can see unauthorized access or security anomalies in real time. We can set up alerts also, so we can have a automation in this, that if something is getting flagged, we can get a notification which we can then use promptly to identify and respond to potential security incident before they escalate. So before the data gets more, like they get more data, we can implement security measures to prevent that. And also we should regularly review and analyze log data to proactively detect and mitigate security threats. So we should not wait something bad to happen. We should keep a regular check on the logs so uh, we can prevent it before it even happens. Last, we have denial of service attack. So DOS attacks occurs, they disrupt the service availability by overwhelming systems with malicious traffic, rendering them inaccessible to legitimate user by exhausting resources. So someone can make like thousand or millions of requests to our system, which our system won't be able to handle. So it would disrupt the service for our legitimate user. It would also cause resource exhaustion since we have a limited amount of resource for any application. DOS attacks exploit that vulnerability and exhaust the system resource like a network bandwidth or processing power or causing service degradation or complete unavailability. So we should use strategies like rate limiting, traffic filtering, and access controls to mitigate DOS attack and prevent malicious traffic from overwhelming the system. So if we have rate limiting, so if a user is making thousands of requests in a minute, we should mitigate that. We should have a rate limiting that a user can only make 10 requests or like a limited amount of requests for a limited amount of time. Then we can scale our resource and implement redundancy to handle sudden traffic spikes, ensuring continued service availability, and regularly update the mitigation strategies to adapt to evolving threats. Lastly, we have some common practices that we should follow in our application every day. We should have input validation. We should always validate the input data from user and external sources to prevent injection attacks like SQL injection and cross-site scripting. We should have parameterized query. So if we implement the parameterized query in stored procedure or in the queries, we can prevent the data breach from the database using the SQL injection attack. We should also have secure authentication. So if we implement secure authentication mechanism like multi-factor authentication and strong password policies, any attacker would not be able to access unauthorized resources. We should also have authorization. So proper authorization ensure that user can only access the resource that they are allowed to. If they are not allowed to a resource, they should not have access to that resource then. Data encryption. So we should encrypt data both at rest and in transit using strong encryption algorithms. And secure configuration we should follow the best practices for server configuration, including disabling unnecessary service and keeping software up to date. So if we are using a particular library which gets updated, we should update our system also. So if someone is trying to access a vulnerability in the older version, that should not happen in the latest version. Thank you. That will be all. If anyone has any question, they can ask now.
Yeah, hi Vipul. So my question is how am I going to find out like my code has some vulnerabilities? So how are you going to check that?
So that you can do penetration testing, but this usually is the job of a tester. They would do the security measures, like they would check the security threats in your application. But you can make sure by following the common practices and making sure that you are following all the you are applying all the security practice. So using that, you can make sure that your application is secure.
And adding to this, there are certain patterns and stuff that we need to use while we are coding, like which are already considered as good practices. Like if you are working with the SQL or stored procedure, you should use parameterized configurations and parameterized queries and all, so that the injection should not be there. And when you are working with the web APIs and all, then in that case you have to make sure that authentication and authorization is already there and CSRF is already there. So these are the basic things that you need to take care. Apart from that, there are multiple scans that happens when you merge your code to the master, or when you build your code in the CI/CD pipeline. At that time, if Sonar scan and 45 scans are there, which will take care of a lot of vulnerabilities that are there, including very small vulnerabilities like multiple if and else case, etc. And so these are the things that take care of your code vulnerabilities and code quality as well.
Yeah, yeah, sure.
Pratiksha, I think there is no such question, so you can take over now.
Yes. Okay. So, guys, do you have any questions for Vipin or Vipul? Anyone is having any query, any question that you would, want them to address now? Okay. So I suppose Vipin and Vipul, they don't have any questions. Thank you so much for taking out time and, being a part of this session. It was very insightful. Thank you, Vipul, and thank you, Vipin.